Imagine for a second, right, that you have a friend. And I don't mean just like an acquaintance, but your absolute best friend in the entire world.
Of like your closest confidant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've traveled together, you've eaten at the same tables, weathered some seriously difficult storms together. And then one afternoon, they sit you down.
Okay.
And the air in the room just shifts. You can instantly tell they're about to deliver the most profound, world-altering news in the history of humanity.
You can just feel the tension.
Right. And
Yeah.
they look you dead in the eye with just total sincerity, and they say, I am about to conquer death itself. I'm going to permanently defeat the grave, unravel the fabric of mortality, and, save the entire universe.
I mean, that is the ultimate mic drop.
The ultimate, the greatest news that has literally ever been uttered on planet Earth. But in this scenario, what is your reaction? Like your immediate, unfiltered gut response?
Well, you'd think it would be joy.
You would. But it isn't joy. It isn't a standing ovation. It is just utter devastation. You are grieved to your core. You are looking at your friend who just promised to cure death, and you are crying tears of profound disappointment.
Wow.
And why? Because their intricate cosmic plan to save the universe really throws a wrench into your personal weekend plans. It just completely ruins the career trajectory you had mapped out for yourself.
I mean, when you lay it out like that, it sounds completely absurd.
It sounds ridiculous.
It really does. It sounds like a dark comedy or something. Because, well, we all want to believe that if we were sitting in that room hearing this ultimate promise of victory over death, we would be the ones on our feet cheering.
Right, popping champagne, throwing a parade.
Exactly.
The terrifying reality here is that this exact scenario is not a hypothetical. It is exactly what happened with Jesus and his closest friends.
Yeah, the disconnect is just staggering.
It is. And figuring out how these disciples missed the point so completely, and how you, sitting in your car or maybe walking your dog right now, likely do the exact same thing in your own life. That is exactly what we are going to explore today on this deep dive.
It's going to be a heavy one.
It really is. So our mission today, we are unpacking a profoundly challenging teaching from a church called 1122. Our entire journey today is driven by a sermon delivered by Pastor Matt on a July 4th weekend. And he focuses on the startling, almost bizarre disconnect between Jesus' greatest announcement and the tragic, mournful reaction of the people closest to him.
It's just such a thick, fascinating tension to explore, and to really do Pastor Matt's sermon justice and to fully understand the gravity of what he is saying, we're going to surround his teaching with a lot of supplemental sources.
Right, our source stack.
Exactly. We've got historical context, geographical history, and some deep linguistic analysis of the exact Greek words used in the ancient manuscripts.
Which is going to be so crucial.
It really is. We're also pulling in some socio-historical commentaries and theological essays to examine how modern thinkers try to grapple with the sheer shock value of these biblical texts, specifically Matthew chapters 16, 17, and 18, along with a bit of John 12.
So we are really trying to reconstruct the heavy historical air in the room so you can feel exactly why the disciples reacted the way they did.
Absolutely.
And we really have to start right where Pastor Matt begins his 1122 sermon, because he does this brilliant job of disarming the congregation before just hitting them with a sledgehammer.
He really sets them up.
He does. So it's a holiday weekend, July 4th, and he jokes with the crowd that they might be a little disappointed because the usual star of their church, Pastor Joby, isn't the one preaching that day.
Right, getting a little chuckle out of the crowd.
Exactly, gets a laugh. But Matt doesn't let them sit in that joke for more than a second. He pivots immediately to this vital foundational truth. He says, Jesus is the star, period. Pastor Joby would be the first person to tell you that.
Which is such an important grounding moment.
It is. And then Matt looks at the congregation and asks a question that, honestly, it forced me to put down my pen and just stare at the wall for a minute.
Oh, wow. What was it?
He asks, is Jesus really the center of your story, or are you?
Man, that is a piercing diagnostic question right there. It completely bypasses all of our polished, Sunday school answers. If you ask anyone sitting in a church pew who is the center of the story, they know the correct theological answer is Jesus.
Obviously. We all know the right answer for a test.
Exactly. But Pastor Matt is asking about our functional theology. Like, how do we actually operate in our day-to-day lives? How do we react when the story doesn't go the way we want it to.
Yes, that's the real test.
Because our reactions to adversity, our reactions to deep disappointment, they usually reveal who is actually sitting on the throne of our lives.
I mean, that hit me so hard. It made me think immediately about how we use GPS navigation on our phones today.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. So when I pull out my phone and type in a destination, I am firmly putting myself at the center of that journey. I want the app to serve my preferred route.
Of course, you want the fastest way.
Exactly. I want no tolls, I want to see where the speed traps are, and I want absolutely zero traffic. The GPS exists solely to facilitate my comfort and my goals.
It is entirely an accessory to your journey.
Yes, a digital accessory. And if I am driving along making good time and suddenly the app chimes and reroutes me, maybe it forces me off the highway, taking me through some convoluted back roads, or worse, through a valley where I lose cell service and get stuck behind a tractor. I get furious.
Oh, I've yelled at my phone plenty of times.
We all do. We literally yell at a piece of glass.
Right.
And why? Because we expect the GPS to serve us. And I realized, listening to Pastor Matt, that is exactly how we treat God.
That is a staggering realization when you really sit with it.
It is. We type in our life's destination. A successful career, a spouse who understands us perfectly, a beautiful house, financial security, healthy kids. We type all that into our spiritual GPS, and we expect God to just act as the satellite in the sky, smoothly guiding us there.
Right, just making it easy.
And the moment He reroutes us through a valley of suffering or a season of profound waiting, we get furious with Him. We get angry because we haven't realized the fundamental truth. We are merely participants in His story. He is not a supporting actor in ours.
That GPS analogy, it just perfectly captures the exact psychological state of the disciples in the historical backdrop of Pastor Matt's main text.
It really does.
And to really understand the climax of Matt's sermon, we have to rewind just slightly to look at the supplemental history of Matthew chapter 16.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Jesus and his disciples are in the region of Caesarea Philippi. Now, historically speaking, this is an intense, visually overwhelming place to have a defining conversation.
Because it wasn't a Jewish center, right?
Not at all. Caesarea Philippi was a massive hub of pagan worship. It sat right at the base of Mount Hermon. There was this enormous rock face, a literal cliff with a deep cave that the locals actually referred to as the Gates of Hell.
Oh, wow. The Gates of Hell.
Yeah, and it was dedicated to the worship of the god Pan.
So you have shrines, temples, sacrifices happening. It's like walking through the Times Square of ancient pagan religion.
Precisely. It is loud, it is culturally dominant, and it is entirely antithetical to the Jewish faith. And standing in the shadow of this massive rock dedicated to false gods, Jesus turns to his disciples and asks the ultimate question.
Who do you say that I am?
Exactly. And Peter, bold, brash Peter, steps up and gets it exactly right. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God."
He absolutely nails it. He gets the gold star in theology class that day.
He really does. And Jesus affirms him in a profound way. He tells Peter that this knowledge didn't come from human deduction, flesh and blood. It was a revelation given directly to him by God the Father.
Which is huge.
It is. Jesus even renames him. He says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." It is a moment of pure, divine clarity and immense elevation for Peter.
Okay, but this is where the emotional whiplash really kicks in, right? Because this beautiful, triumphant moment lasts for what, about 30 seconds?
If that, yeah. Because immediately after Peter correctly identifies Jesus as the Christ, Jesus begins to explain what the job description of the Christ actually entails.
And it is not what Peter expected.
Not at all. Jesus explains that his mission is not to conquer Rome, but to go to Jerusalem, to suffer many terrible things at the hands of the religious elites, and ultimately to be killed.
He starts describing a horrific reroute on the GPS.
Exactly. And Peter's reaction is visceral. It is immediate. He actually takes Jesus aside. Like he pulls the Son of God aside and rebukes him. He says, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you."
Which is just such a wild thing to do. I mean, you just confess this guy is the Son of the living God, and in the literal next breath, you're pulling him into an alley to tell him his business plan is garbage.
Right. It's mind-boggling. But it's because Peter's definition of the Christ was fundamentally different from Jesus's definition.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, Jesus issues a response that is completely devastating. He looks at Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan.
Oh, man.
You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man."
To go from "you are the rock upon which I will build my church" to "get behind me, Satan," in the span of one single conversation. I mean, I can't even imagine the sting of that whiplash.
It had to hurt.
But I want to pause here because we really need to understand Peter's mindset. Based on the socio-historical sources, why did he react so violently to the idea of Jesus suffering? Why does he get it so wrong so fast?
So to understand Peter, you really have to understand the first century Jewish experience under the Roman Empire.
Right, because they weren't free.
No, they were a severely occupied people. The Roman boot was firmly on their necks. They paid exorbitant taxes. They suffered brutal military oppression. They had zero political autonomy. And for centuries, they had been waiting for the Messiah.
To promise deliverer.
Exactly. But their cultural expectation of the Messiah was that of a conquering military king, like another King David. They wanted a general who would ride into Jerusalem on a war horse, slaughter the Roman legions, drive out the oppressors, and reestablish a glorious earthly kingdom for Israel.
So when Peter says you are the Christ, he is essentially saying you are our five-star general. You are the guy who is going to lead the violent revolution.
He absolutely is. And let's look at the human ambition tied up in that. If Jesus sets up a literal earthly kingdom in Jerusalem, Peter, as his right-hand man, the guy who just got the gold star and the near nickname, he is expecting a very comfortable cabinet position in the new administration.
Well, for sure. He wants to be the Secretary of State.
Exactly. He expects status, power, security, wealth. So when Jesus reveals a completely different plan, a plan centered on absolute surrender, suffering, and death, Peter's true center is exposed.
Which ties right back to Pastor Matt's opening question.
Exactly. Peter wasn't rebuking Jesus because he was trying to protect his friend. He was rebuking Jesus because he was trying to protect his own ambition.
Wow. He was protecting his own political stock portfolio. He wanted the Messiah to serve his specific route to glory.
That's it, exactly.
That is such a painful mirror to hold up to ourselves. Because, I mean, how often do I get mad at God when he doesn't bless the business I started or he doesn't fix the relationship I want him to fix on my specific timeline? I'm doing the exact same thing Peter did.
We all do.
And what's fascinating is that this clash of expectations, this underlying tension of who is really in charge, it doesn't just resolve itself right there in Caesarea Philippi. It acts as the catalyst for the next major movement in the story.
It really sets the stage for a dramatic narrative roller coaster because the text takes us from a literal mountaintop straight down into a deeply traumatized historical valley.
So let's go to that mountaintop first. Because in Matthew 17, we get this scene known as the Transfiguration.
All right, an incredible moment.
So Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain by themselves. And the text says Jesus was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as light. The veil of his humanity is just peeled back for a second, and they see the blinding reality of his divinity.
It's hard to even picture it.
It really is. And suddenly, standing there talking with him are Moses and Elijah. And Pastor Matt spent some time reflecting on this in the 11:22 sermon, and he shares this speculative theory that he admitted literally brought him to tears when he was studying it.
It is a deeply moving part of the sermon.
Yeah, Matt asked a really simple question. What were they talking about? We know they were talking, but what do you even say to the Son of God when you are standing in glory on a mountain?
It's a great question.
And Matt's theory is that Moses looked at Jesus and simply said, go finish this thing. We started it, the message, the covenant, the love, the redemption. It's been passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years, and now you are here. All that's left is a cross. Go finish it.
Man, it is a profound, breathtaking thought when you break down who was actually standing on that mountain with the historical context.
Nothing more about that.
Well, you don't just have two random historical figures. You have the physical embodiments of the two massive pillars of the Jewish faith. Moses represents the law. He is the one who literally received the commandments on Mount Sinai.
Right.
And Elijah represents the prophets. He is the ultimate voice calling the people to repentance. The entire Old Testament is categorized as the law and the prophets.
Right. It's the entire bedrock of their worldview.
Exactly. And the profound logical causality here is that neither the law nor the prophets could actually save humanity.
Because we couldn't keep the rules.
Exactly. The law was a perfect standard that humanity was utterly incapable of meeting. And the prophets were just the megaphone reminding humanity of how badly they were failing at it.
Ouch. Yeah.
So when Moses and Elijah stand there with Jesus, it isn't just a friendly supernatural greeting. They are acknowledging that the system they represented is concluding. They're looking at the only human being in history who can perfectly fulfill the law and absorb the ultimate judgment the prophets warned about.
Wow.
They are validating that the cross is the only logical conclusion to the story they started.
The ultimate fulfillment. That is so much richer than just viewing it as a cool supernatural cameo appearance.
Definitely.
So you have this monumental cosmic affirmation on the mountain, the ultimate spiritual high. But what stood out to me from the historical sources is what happens immediately after this. They come down from that mountain of glory, and they travel to a very specific place.
Yes, the geography here is key.
Right. Pastor Matt points out that Matthew specifically notes they were gathering in Galilee. Now, to me, reading this on a Tuesday morning, it just sounds like a random geographical marker. Meanwhile, back in Galilee, it feels like filler text.
It is anything but filler. In the ancient world, geography was theology. Where things happen was often just as important as what happened.
Right.
Oh, yeah. If you look at the historical records of the ancient Near East, the region of Galilee, specifically they called it Galilee of the Nations or Galilee of the Gentiles, it has an incredibly dark, blood-soaked, and troubled history.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it was the northernmost territory of Israel. And historically, going all the way back to 733 BC, it was the very first region to fall to the Assyrian invasion.
And the Assyrians were not known for their gentle diplomacy.
No, they were the terror of the ancient world. Under King Tiglath-Pileser III, the Assyrian war machine was unspeakably brutal. When they swept down into the northern kingdom, Galilee was ground zero. It was the entry point of the exile for the northern tribes of Israel. And the Assyrians didn't just conquer, they deported. They dragged the Israelites out of their homeland with literal hooks in their noses.
Oh my gosh.
And then they repopulated the area with foreigners. This strategy was designed to completely erase a people's national identity. And this is exactly why it became known as Galilee of the Gentiles. It was a mixed, culturally diluted, profoundly traumatized region.
So for a Jewish person in the first century, hearing the word Galilee, it wasn't just a spot on a map. It carried the emotional weight of historical subjugation. It was a place practically synonymous with deceit, exile, and just the deep generational trauma of losing their land.
Exactly. It was the scar tissue of the nation. So consider the brilliant cinematic contrast Jesus is staging here. We have the ultimate high Moses and Elijah glowing in divine light, validating the climax of cosmic history. And then the very next scene, Jesus walks his disciples down the mountain and straight into this historically war-torn, subjugated, culturally complicated neighborhood.
Why there of all places?
Because he is bringing the ultimate victory, the definitive defeat of death and sin, to the exact geographical coordinates where Israel suffered its first, most catastrophic defeat.
Oh, wow. He is staging the victory at ground zero of their deepest trauma. It's like a deliberate geographic reclamation project.
It underscores the theological continuity of his redemptive act perfectly. He doesn't announce the conquest of death in a pristine palace in Rome or some wealthy suburb of Jerusalem. He announces it in the dirt of Galilee.
That gives me chills. That is so intentional. But here is where the tragedy of the 11:22 sermon really takes center stage.
The disconnect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jesus sets up this momentous announcement in this deeply symbolic location. He is about to tell them how he will win the ultimate victory. In Matthew 17, verses 22 and 23, Jesus tells his friends, plain as day, the Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day.
It is the gospel in a single sentence.
It is. Yeah. And Pastor Matt points out the staggering irony of their reaction here. Jesus just announced the greatest news in human history. He is going to make the final payment for all sin. He is going to permanently conquer death, meaning the grave is no longer a period at the end of the human sentence. It's just a comma.
Right.
Yet the text explicitly says the disciples were, quote, grieved to their core. They were greatly distressed.
And to really understand the sheer weight of that grief, we have to look closely at the Greek phrasing Matthew uses in the original manuscripts. Because the language here shows us exactly why this statement felt so incredibly heavy to them, yet was so utterly sovereign.
Let's get into the Greek then.
Okay, first let's look at the phrase translated as is about to be or is going to be. In the original Greek, this is the word mele.
Mele. Okay, what's the nuance there? Because in English, saying go to be just sounds like a future event on a calendar, like I'm going to go to the store.
Right. In English, it just implies a future possibility. But the Greek word mele carries a profound sense of absolute certainty, destiny, and divine necessity.
So it's locked in.
Exactly. It implies that what is about to happen is an unavoidable decree woven into the fabric of the universe itself. Jesus isn't telling them, hey guys, things are getting a little hot with the Pharisees in Jerusalem. I'm getting a bad feeling about this and I might get caught.
He's not guessing.
No, he is telling them, this is the sovereign destiny for which I was born. It is inevitable.
It is a calculated, unalterable mission.
Exactly. And that divine necessity is compounded by the very next word, paradidastai, which is the verb for delivered. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. Now, notice that this verb is in the passive voice.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm not a grammar expert. Why does the passive voice matter so much here?
Well, in biblical Greek, when a passive voice is used without specifically naming the actor doing the action, it is often what scholars call a divine passive.
A divine passive, meaning God.
Yes. It is a reverent way of saying that God is the unseen actor behind the scenes. Jesus isn't just saying that Judas will deliver him or the Romans will arrest him. The passive voice implies that God, the Father, is the one delivering him over. The Father is handing the Son over to humanity as part of the redemptive plan.
That is heavy. The Father is orchestrating the arrest.
Yes.
And I was reading in the sources that there's also a fascinating textual variant in the ancient manuscripts right at the beginning of verse 22 that sets the scene for this disconnect, right?
Yeah, this is really interesting. Scholars who study the oldest fragments of the Gospel of Matthew note a debate over the specific Greek word used to describe what the disciples were actually doing in Galilee when Jesus dropped this bombshell.
What are the two options?
Well, some of the older texts use the word anastrophomenon, which essentially means abiding, dwelling, or just simply going about the mundane tasks of daily life, hanging out.
Right.
But other ancient texts use the word sistrophomenon, which implies a much more active gathering, banding together, or organizing themselves.
But practically speaking, whether they were just chilling out or actively organizing their travel plans, the psychological picture is exactly the same, isn't it?
Precisely. The contrast in focus is what's staggering. You have the disciples focused entirely on the horizontal, living their lives, organizing their earthly movement, probably still dreaming about those cabinet positions in the new earthly kingdom.
Picking up their office furniture?
Exactly. And right in the middle of their mundane earthly focus, Jesus drops a vertical bombshell. He is orchestrating a cosmic rescue mission that requires his violent death.
Okay, I hear all of this. I hear the Greek, I hear the theology, I see the history, but I have to push back just a little bit.
Go for it.
Because as I was listening to the sermon, I found myself really wanting to defend the disciples. I won't play the empathetic skeptic for a second here.
Okay.
If I'm standing in Galilee and my best friend, someone I've traveled with, shared meals with, and loved deeply for years, looks to me and says, I am going to be violently murdered by our enemies, I would be grieved to my core too. I would be weeping. Isn't their grief just a totally normal, beautiful display of human empathy? Why do we, and why does the text give them such a hard time for being sad that their best friend is going to die?
It is a deeply fair question, and we absolutely shouldn't strip them of their humanity. Certainly, human empathy and the raw terror of losing a loved one play a role in their reaction.
Right, they're human.
But if you dig into the historical context and the narrative arc we've been tracking since Caesarea Philippi, their grief is much, much more complex than simple empathy. Their grief is ultimately rooted in the death of their own entitlement.
Goes right back to the GPS.
Exactly. Remember what Pastor Matt emphasized? They were entirely stubbornly focused on the kingdom of God as a means of political power and personal elevation. They wanted a conqueror.
So the word kill changes everything.
Yes. When Jesus says the word kill, it doesn't just mean the tragic end of a biological life. For the disciples, it shatters their personal career paths. It is the bankruptcy of their political stock portfolio.
Wow.
They are grieved because their investment in this earthly kingdom is suddenly going up in smoke. They stake their entire lives on a general, and he is telling them he is going to be a martyr.
And the ultimate proof that their grief was selfish rather than purely empathetic is the very last phrase of Jesus' sentence. Because they completely stopped listening after the word kill.
They did.
They had selective hearing. Jesus didn't put a period after the word kill. He literally finished the sentence by saying, and he will be raised on the third day. He gave them the spoiler. He told them the ending was victorious.
It is one of the most tragic examples of selective hearing in recorded history. They were so consumed by the loss of their own plans, so devastated by the rerouted GPS, that they couldn't even process the promise of the resurrection.
They just blacked out.
The grief of losing their earthly ambition completely deafened them to the promise of eternal victory.
They missed the greatest news ever. because it required a route they didn't want to take. And it is a profound tragedy that they ignored the phrase, raised on the third day, because those words actually contain a linguistic secret that fundamentally changes how we view the power of Jesus.
Yes.
I was diving into some of the supplemental linguistic essays on this, and they discuss something called the verbs of the resurrection. I had never heard of this before, and it honestly blew my mind.
It is a phenomenal linguistic insight. The essay notes that if you track the language of the New Testament writers across all the Gospels and epistles, they use two entirely different Greek verbs to describe the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
And they use them interchangeably, which tells us a lot about early Christian theology.
Break those down for us. What are the two verbs?
The first verb is iseru. This verb is almost always used in the passive voice when referring to Jesus. It translates to, he was raised.
Okay, he was raised.
Right. And the theological implication here is that God the Father is the active agent. Jesus was dead in the tomb, and the power of the Father acted upon him, pulling him back into life.
Right, like an external rescue operation.
Yeah.
The Father reaches into the grave and raises the Son.
Exactly. But there is a second verb, anistomi, which is used frequently in the active voice. This verb translates simply to he rose.
He rose.
Yes, and this emphasizes a completely different reality. It emphasizes Jesus' own inherent divine power. It declares that he himself had the authority and the indestructible life within him to conquer death and rise from the grave under his own power.
So which one is it? Did the Father raise him, or did he rise on his own?
Well, the beauty of early Christian theology is that the answer is simply yes. The sources highlight what theologians call a stereoscopic vision of faith.
I love that phrase so much. Stereoscopic vision.
Think about human biology, right? Having two eyes set slightly apart gives you depth perception. If you close one eye, the world becomes flat. In the same way, these two verbs give us theological depth perception. The early texts allow for both realities to be true simultaneously. God the Father raised Jesus by his mighty power, and Jesus had the inherent divine authority to rise himself.
It perfectly captures the dual nature of Christ. As a human, he was fully reliant on the Father, trusting the Father to vindicate him. But as the divine Son of God, he possessed the power of indestructible life. He was raised, and he rose. It's a beautiful paradox.
It is, but Pastor Matt's sermon forces us to remember the profound cost of that dual nature. We can sit here and talk about fascinating Greek verbs and stereoscopic theology all day, but we must never forget the human side of Jesus.
Right, the actual suffering.
Exactly. He wasn't a stoic, emotionless robot simply executing a divine algorithm completely unaffected by the impending horror. Matt brings in a crucial passage from the Gospel of John to illustrate this.
Right, John chapter 12, verse 27.
Yes. Jesus is anticipating the cross, and he says, "Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this purpose I have come to this hour."
Wow.
It is a window into the sheer terror his human nature felt. He actively, consciously chose the cross, even while his human soul was convulsing at the very thought of it.
And I think that's where we as modern listeners really need to be challenged, because we have completely sanitized the cross today.
Oh, without a doubt.
We have stripped it of all its terror. We wear it as shiny gold jewelry around our necks.
Yeah.
We get it tattooed with pretty roses on our forearms. We put it on top of church steeples with bright neon lights.
We make it pretty.
We have taken a Roman instrument of state-sponsored terrorism and turned it into a benign corporate logo. We completely forget the absolute horror, the stench, the flies, the humiliation, and the agonizing terror of what a crucifixion actually was in the first century.
That sanitization is a massive barrier to understanding the text. If we are going to understand why the disciples were so grieved and why Jesus' soul was troubled, we have to look unblinkingly at the historical reality of the cross.
What was it actually like?
Well, in the Roman Empire, crucifixion wasn't just a method of execution. It was a carefully engineered system of public humiliation and psychological dominance. The Romans wanted it to be as slow, as painful, and as visible as humanly possible.
It was a message.
Exactly. The victim was usually stripped naked, flogged until their back was ribbons, and then nailed to wood along major roadways so everyone traveling could see the absolute dominance of Rome. It was designed to say, this is what happens when you defy the empire.
It was a billboard of terror. So for a first-century Jew like Peter, to hear that the Messiah was going to be crucified, it wasn't just sad, it was profoundly shameful. It meant total defeat.
Exactly. And think about how hard it is for us, sitting in comfortable modern lives, to truly feel the visceral terror of the cross.
We just don't have a grid for it.
Right. So theologians often search for modern cultural equivalents to bridge that emotional gap. For instance, in an essay from the Reformed Journal, they discuss how writers attempt to translate that ancient shock value for a modern audience.
And how do they do that?
Well, the late theologian James Cone made a very sobering, highly discussed connection. He compared the cross to the American lynching tree.
Wow. That is a heavy, jarring comparison.
It is meant to be jarring, and it's important to note Cone's argument wasn't about modern politics per se. It was a deliberate attempt to make modern Americans feel the exact type of visceral, systemic terror that a first-century Jew would have felt looking at a Roman cross.
To make it real.
Exactly. He argued that if you want to understand what the cross symbolized culturally, the arbitrary power of the state, the public spectacle of suffering, the deep societal shame, and the terrorizing of an oppressed community, the closest cultural symbol in recent American history is the lynching tree.
That reframes it entirely. It forces you to look at the sheer brutality and injustice of it, rather than just viewing it as a clean religious transaction.
And the essay notes that other writers take this a step further when discussing discipleship, because Jesus demands that his followers take up their cross.
Right.
Some modern thinkers apply this to the painful work of dismantling systemic issues, such as white privilege or deep-seated cultural advantages.
So taking up the cross is active surrender.
Yes. The argument is that true discipleship isn't just about personal piety or going to church on Sunday. True discipleship means a painful, absolute surrender of one's own societal comforts, advantages, and self-preservation. Just as the literal cross demanded the absolute surrender of Jesus' physical life and dignity, taking up our cross demands the death of our deeply ingrained entitlements.
If following Jesus actually requires this brutal crucifixion of our own entitlement, our own ambition, our desire to be comfortable and in charge, how do we actually do that?
It's the million-dollar question.
Because I'll be honest, it feels impossible. My instinct is always self-preservation. How do I kill my desire to be the star of my own story?
Yeah.
How do I let go of the steering wheel?
Well, Pastor Matt offers a solution in the 11:22 sermon, and it's surprisingly simple, yet incredibly difficult to execute in real life.
Okay, what is it?
This brings us to the final brilliant movement of our deep dive, which centers on Matthew chapter 18. The scene shifts again, and we see that despite everything Jesus has told them about his impending suffering and death, the disciples are still completely missing the point.
Typical.
Right.
Yeah.
What are they doing in Matthew 18? They are arguing among themselves about who is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.
They are literally still jockeying for those cabinet positions.
Yes.
Jesus is talking about dying a horrific death, and they are arguing over who gets the corner office in the new administration. The blindness is just astounding.
It is the ultimate display of adult ambition and ego. So Jesus, being the master teacher, he does something highly symbolic. He stops the argument, calls a young child over, and places the child right in the middle of this group of ambitious, arguing men.
Okay.
And he tells them, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven."
I loved how Pastor Matt illustrated this during the church service.
Yeah.
Because he showed a video of the kids at 11:22 explaining theology in their own simple terms.
Oh, that was great.
It was so moving and genuinely funny, too. The interviewer asks some profound theological questions, and the kids just give these brilliantly simple, profound answers. Like, when asked what sin is, one little kid just says, "It's hiding."
Hiding, which is profound.
It is,
Yeah.
because that is exactly what Adam and Eve did in the garden. And when asked what surrender is, another child simply says, "It's giving your life to Jesus." It is so refreshing compared to the overcomplicated, status-obsessed ambition of the adults in the room.
It is deeply refreshing to us today, but we really have to strip away our modern sentimentality here to understand the text.
What do you mean?
Well, when Jesus pulls this kid into the circle in the first century, he's not doing it just because kids are cute or innocent. The sociolinguistic commentaries on antiquity paint a very different picture of childhood.
How so?
In the ancient Greco-Roman and Jewish worlds, children did not have the sentimental reverence we afford them today. A child had literally zero social status. Under Roman law, specifically the concept of paterfamilias, a child was essentially considered property.
Property.
Yes, they were entirely dependent on the patriarch of the family for survival, protection, and identity. A father could even legally abandon an infant to die of exposure if he chose to.
So they were the most vulnerable, powerless demographic in this society.
Yeah.
They had no rights, no wealth, and literally nothing to offer in a transactional culture.
Exactly. So Jesus isn't just saying be cute and innocent. He's attacking their entire social hierarchy.
Oh,
By making a child the living parable for the kingdom of heaven, Jesus is completely upending their value system. He is telling these men who are obsessed with greatness and power that greatness in God's eyes equates to possessing zero status. It equates to recognizing your absolute terrifying dependency on the Father.
he is asking them to embrace powerlessness.
Yes. And furthermore, the specific Greek word used here for turn or be converted is fascinating. It's the word streph.
Streph.
Yes, and it literally means to turn around, to reverse direction, or to bring something back to the place it used to be. Jesus is telling these ambitious men that they must reverse course. They must unlearn their adult self-sufficiency, unlearn their obsession with status, and return to an original state of complete trust and helplessness.
Okay, so the diagnosis is clear. We need to abandon our adult ambition and return to childlike dependency. We need to stop fighting for the steering wheel of the GPS. But how do we achieve that practically?
That's the hard part.
Right? How do I become like a child when I have a mortgage, a career, a 401k, and very real adult responsibilities? Pastor Matt says the answer, the actual daily practice of this surrender, is found in how we pray.
And he points specifically to the model prayer that Jesus gave his disciples, what we commonly call the Lord's Prayer.
Right. Matt notes that when Jesus taught the disciples how to pray, the very first petition, right after acknowledging God as our Father in heaven, is the phrase, "Hallowed be your name."
Yes.
And Matt breaks this down powerfully. He explains that praying "Hallowed be your name" literally means praying, "God, I want your name to be lifted above my name."
Wow.
It's an active, intentional surrender of the ego right at the very start of the conversation.
It is a profound reorientation of the self. To hallow God's name is to declare it holy, set apart, and supreme above all other names, agendas, and desires, especially your own. It is the verbal crucifixion of that self-centered GPS mentality.
But let's be fiercely honest about how difficult that is to pray and actually mean it.
Oh, it's incredibly hard.
Most of the time, when I pray, I am treating God exactly like a cosmic vending machine. I put in my prayer coin, maybe a few minutes of quiet time in the morning. I press the button for the exact outcome I want, and I expect God to dispense the product.
Right. Give him what I asked for.
Exactly. I want health, I want success, I want my kids to behave, I want an easy commute. If I pray, "Hallowed be your name," and I actually mean it, I am accepting a terrifying reality. I am accepting that God's name might be glorified through my failure.
Yeah.
His name might be hallowed through my sickness or my financial loss or my drastically rerouted plans.
That is the crux of the struggle.
Accepting that our personal ambitions, our deeply held dreams, might have to die so that God's overarching mission can live. That requires a terrifying level of trust. It goes against every survival instinct we have.
But that terrifying level of trust is the exact definition of childlike faith. Think about a healthy parent-child dynamic. A young child doesn't understand the complexities of the world. They don't understand how the mortgage is paid. They don't understand medical science when they have to get a scary shot at the doctor.
Right.
But they trust that the parent knows best, even when the circumstances are painful or confusing. Praying "Hallowed be your name" means acknowledging that God's perspective is infinite, while ours is incredibly confined. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, surrender of the illusion that we are in control.
So if we look back at the immense amount of ground we've covered today on this deep dive,
We've covered a lot.
we really have. We started in Caesarea Philippi, with the disciples trying to force Jesus into the center of their political story, treating him like a celestial GPS to guide them to earthly glory.
And we saw how that selfish ambition caused them to completely miss the greatest news in human history. When Jesus announced the defeat of death, they were deaf to the promise of the resurrection because they were so grieved that their own plans had to be sacrificed.
Right.
We examined the gritty, historical reality of the cross, stripping away the sanitized, comfortable versions we often accept, and we explored the magnificent dual power of the resurrection, that Christ was raised by the Father and rose by his own divine authority.
And finally, we looked at the radical, subversive call to abandon our adult entitlement, our obsession with greatness, and return to the completely dependent, trusting, vulnerable faith of a child.
Which brings this entire conversation right back to you, the listener.
Yes, it does.
We don't want this to just be an interesting theological history lesson. We want this to intersect with where you are sitting right now today. So take a moment right now to evaluate your current frustrations.
Think about the things that are making you angry, anxious, or deeply disappointed today.
Exactly. Are you grieved right now because God is actually offering you a resurrection, a new profound reality in some area of your life, but you are too focused on the fact that your own plans, your own expectations, have to be crucified first? Are you missing the ultimate victory because you are too busy mourning the loss of your own control? That is a heavy, heavy question to sit with. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought inspired by these sources, something to chew on long after this deep dive ends. We spend so much of our lives trying to climb the ladder, trying to acquire knowledge and status.
We do.
But what if the ultimate proof of spiritual maturity isn't how much theological knowledge you've accumulated?
Yeah.
What if it isn't how many Greek verbs you can parse, how many Bible verses you can quote from memory, or how much respect you've gained in your church community?
That's a paradigm shift.
What if true, profound spiritual maturity is defined by how quickly you can return to the utter helplessness and dependency of a child when the storms of life hit?
When the medical x-ray is murky, when the bank account is low, and the diagnostic waters of your life are muddy, do you demand answers as an entitled adult who deserves a smooth ride? Or do you reach for the Father's hand in the dark as a trusting child?
Just remember, a rerouted GPS doesn't mean you're lost. It might just mean you aren't the one driving anymore. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll catch you next time.